Hello and welcome to this webinar, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly of eLearning. My name's John Wellwood, Managing Director of 100% Effective, and for the next 30 minutes or so I'm going to be talking to you about e-learning and the good things, the bad things and the ugly things about it. The other voice that you'll hear as we talk about these things is Philippa. Philippa's Head of Marketing at 100% Effective, and she's going to moderate for us as we go through. If you've got any questions, please ask them by typing them in the chat stuff on the left-hand side of the screen, and we'll either talk about them as we go or we'll pick them up at the end, just depending on what they are. You can also join us on Twitter, so if you use the number or the hashtag or whatever it is, at 100PC Effective, then you can see what other people are saying, or you can ask us questions that way as well. So without further ado, let's start talking about e-learning. Lots of people have got experience of e-learning in different ways. I remember back in the late 1980s, beginning of the 90s, when I worked for Kodak, I was given an e-learning course to take. It was probably some compliance course or other. And what I was actually sent was a PowerPoint slide deck with the notes underneath it, and I was told to read it. If that's your paradigm or the way you've seen e-learning in the past, then we start to get people, when we ask them about e-learning, saying things like this. They say, I can't learn like that. It's dull, it's boring, it doesn't give me any engagement. I need to have interaction with other people, otherwise I can't learn. So they have a very negative aspect and outlook on what e-learning is like. Effectively, they think it's like reading a book. E-learning has moved on substantially in the last 10 years and is far more engaging and better than it's ever been. Good e-learning for us should be dynamic, it should be engaging, it should be interactive, and it should be exciting. And if it's not, then of course you're going to get all the things that I've just said about it being dull and not being engaging at all. So by dynamic, it should have movement, it should have colour, it should have a story, it should catch the attention of the learner so that they can move it forward and do better things and learn the skills that are required. It needs to be interactive, so it needs to drag you into the learning activity by making you do things. Do an exercise, drag and drop these things. It needs to make you better and engage in the story and the learning as you go through. And ultimately, it needs to be exciting and fun. If it's not, then of course it's not going to make your learning very effective. So let's have a look at some things that good e-learning should have, in our opinion. We need to make sure that we've got things where you as the learner have to click things to reveal things. You need to try and find out answers to see things. So in this example here, very simple. We just click things and it tells us particular words in this way to try and do it. So we're having to do something to get our learning as we move forward. We can also use things like drag and drop. So in this example here, you've got to answer a question by dragging the particular tiles and putting them into the appropriate position on the screen. And once you do that, then you submit your answer and either you get it wrong or you get it right, but it gets you involved moving forward. Other things good e-learning will have, well, it will have some form of animation in it. So it'll have that movement that just engages you and makes you want to learn more and move forward. So in this case, we've got some people moving in about light bulbs. We look at the answer and then somebody else comes in and does something. So there's some movement on the page. We need to be careful not to overdo it, but the more we can do, the better. We can also encourage people to continue by getting them to collect badges or to get them to do things so they can see what progress they're making in their learning journey. We can put in lots of games and exercises, which again just makes people want to do it and get involved in it. So this is a simple search, word search to try and do those kind of things. Luckily, I know where one of the answers is. So we just click that to try and see it. And then you just keep testing knowledge all the way through your learning journey that you're doing. We also want to make sure that we're constantly checking that someone understands what we've been trying to teach them. So we can put in knowledge checks as we go through. So in this example here, we just rub it off so that we can see whether we're actually learning or not. These are the kind of new things that should be in all good e-learning. Unfortunately, not all e-learning providers do it in that way. So some of them are still back the way that we were doing it maybe in the early 1990s. So what we want to try and do is just kind of have a look at what we would say is the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to start with looking at what we perceive are the bad sides of e-learning. We've recently been doing some competitor analysis, and we've been going out into the market to see what other people do and how they do it. Unfortunately, we've come across some particularly bad examples of e-learning, which sort of reinforces that paradigm that we talked about earlier on. We came across one company, for example, where when you purchase their e-learning, what you actually get sent is an e-book. So you just read a book on the computer effectively. And then if you've got any questions, you send them an email or give them a phone and they'll answer it. That for us is not e-learning. You know, that's not going to engage people and make them do it. We came across another course company that sold e-learning, and actually when you looked at it, it was actually a pre-recording of a classroom training program, which might be good, but the sound quality was terrible. There was people walking in front of the screen. You couldn't hear the people asking questions, but you could hear the trainer. It was almost like buying a pirate video from something on the computer on the cinema. We found other companies where what effectively they'd done was they'd taken their PowerPoint slides and they had somebody reading those slides, or just the words at the side like I had way back in the 1990s. So again, not very good from an e-learning perspective. Other people have moved their PowerPoint slides and they've got some either computer-generated voiceover, which is obviously very poor, or they've got somebody from their office to read out the various slides and the script to go with it. The problem with that, of course, is it's not engaging. We came across one company, in fact, who had actually videoed one of their employees, and over the top of the slide, what happened was a little man walked out onto the screen, read the slides, then walked back off, you clicked next, and then he walked back on again and read the slide again, which I can read a slide as good as anybody else. So having someone just reading the same slides is not the way to go. Other aspects of bad e-learning we see is that you can't access it. E-learning needs to be accessed 24/7, no matter where you are. People want to learn in small bite-sized chunks. So they want to do maybe half an hour while they're on the train or on their commute in the morning. They want to do it at lunchtime. They want to do it in the evening. So it has to be accessible on all devices, not just a laptop. You have to be able to do it on an iPhone and an Android, whenever it is that you want to try and make that happen. We also saw lots of bad clip art, bad images that you couldn't read. All those kind of things don't inspire people to continue to learn. If the navigation is poor, which we also discovered on lots of this, again, you can't find what you want when you want to do it. It's too complicated. There's too many words. These are the bad aspects of e-learning that we keep seeing in lots of people who are selling those kind of things. We also have seen the other extreme, where actually there's so much animation and movement on the screen that it detracts from the actual learning itself. And if you're so busy looking at animation and wondering what's going to happen next, you're not thinking properly and you're not learning as you go. A couple of examples here of what we think are particularly poor or bad e-learning here's one here. It's just a slide with thousands of words on it, and it's not going to inspire anybody. Here's another one which is very similar. It's very hard to read. It's full of words, and it's effectively just a PowerPoint slide. So we've seen lots of really bad examples, and hopefully that's not the e-learning experience you've got in your company. But if it is, it's not going to inspire. It's not going to make you do things. So if that's the bad, what do we mean by the ugly? For us, the ugly side of e-learning is where you're effectively leaving people to do it on their own. People want to know things instantly now. They don't want to go to the training department and say, I need a training course on X, Y, and Z, and then get it signed off and then have to wait for another 10 people to come along to want the same thing. So they get frustrated because they're not getting the learning they want instantly. So what do? They go on YouTube, they go on Google, and they look for it themselves. Now, they might get lucky and they might find some good stuff, but if they don't, the problem is we get different people learning different things. We get sort of confusion of the message. We get the wrong vocabulary used, different vocabulary used. We get no standardization right across the entire piece. So different people learn in different ways. And that leads us to a lack of consistency, poor quality, and we might start getting poor results. We also get a situation where people get frustrated because they want to know something, but they never get a chance to actually do it. So we know that people leave companies because of the lack of training. And if they're getting poor training or no training, that's as bad as no training at all. So we need to try and make sure that we get training that is going to be effective, engaging, and actually delivers a consistency across the entire company. The other problem we've got with some companies when we've talked to them is they don't actually know what good e-learning looks like. So they might buy something they think is really fantastic e-learning, but the reality is it's not. So they end up buying it twice, or the quality is not good enough to engage the learner, so people don't finish it. They just click through it and try and take the test at the end. There's no engagement. So we need to try and get away from that, because good e-learning is going to have a dramatic effect on your business. So we've seen bad e-learning, we've seen ugly e-learning. What do we mean by good e-learning? So for us, e-learning is all about passing on knowledge and skills and giving people the ability to apply that knowledge and skill. So we need to try and develop ways to make that happen. Typically in a classroom training environment, people will retain 8 to 10% of the knowledge they're actually given during that course. However, studies have shown that good e-learning dramatically changes that. The retention of knowledge and how to apply it suddenly becomes 25 to 60%. So that 70-20-10 learning environment is very much supported by e-learning. That's done because of the way good e-learning is set up. So because it's so interactive, it almost drags the learner into the screen and actually makes them engage with the learning. So by doing that drag and drop we talked about earlier on, or doing a click to reveal, or trying to put things in the appropriate order, that suddenly makes you involved in it rather than just sitting, listening to someone talking or reading the screen to try and do that kind of thing. The other thing that's vitally important in good e-learning is that you don't just get the skill, but you learn how to apply the skill or the knowledge that you're doing. So you need to be given ways to do that. So good e-learning will give you exercises where you have to apply the learning. So think about doing it on a simulation, do it in a game, do it on a project you're working, and the actual e-learning will engage you to do that. Good e-learning will also continually check that we've actually understood. So by putting little quizzes or little knowledge checks, we'll know whether we've actually understood what it is we've just been covered with. Again, in a classroom environment, that's quite difficult because you can't constantly be stopping. But where in an e-learning environment, we can do that. So having good engagement, good examples, and good exercises just makes people engage with what's going on, and therefore they start to learn more. We need to be a little bit careful with some of the e-learning, because we want to make sure that you go at your own pace. We want to make sure you learn the way you want to try and do it, and you're not constrained by the slowest learner. But we also don't want you to be overly engaged with all the sort of wizardry that can go along. We need to make sure that we make the story engaging. So the voiceover has to be engaging. It can't be a monotone person just rabbiting on. It can't be a computer-generated voice. It needs to be an engaging professional actor almost that entices you into the learning. So we need good diagrams, good graphics. We need animation to the right level. And if we do that, you drag the learner in, and almost without them realizing, they're engaged and actually they're involved in doing the learning as we go through. As we all know, we all have different learning styles. And typically in a classroom, you're restricted by the ability of the trainer and the material of how it's set out, whether you can hit those learning styles, which is why some people will go on a training course and totally be turned off by it, because they may be a theorist, for example, but nothing's done to actually satisfy them. When we set up good e-learning, we take into account all the learning styles and we give them ways to do it. So for example, we can make sure that the theorists get as much theory as they want. They can have links to go to different levels of knowledge. They can go and read background information. Now, some of the other learners won't want to do that, so they don't have to. But the theorist gets all the background knowledge they require. The activist is given lots of games and exercises and simulations. They get the knowledge checks. They can actually do as much of that as they want. So they, again, feel engaged with the e-learning. Other people who have a learning style which is more reflective will need to think about, what does this mean? How can I use it? Where can I do it? So good e-learning gives those reflective points all the way through the training. So it'll say, reflect on what you've just learned. Think about how you can use it. Write down all your things you need to try and do it. And then the pragmatists among us will want to know, how is this practically being used? Give me examples from other industries. And again, the great thing about e-learning is we can do that all the way through by putting in literally hundreds of examples as we require them. Good e-learning is all about thinking about how to reflect and make sure that the learner's really understanding what's happening so that they can learn it, apply it, and do it. We need to give them the chance to use the learning as they go. So in good e-learning, you will constantly be asked how to apply it, how to use it, do examples. So you get used to trying to make that happen. You get to reflect, and then at the end, when you've typed all these lovely things into the e-learning, you can download it so that you can use it to continue doing what you're happening to try and do those kind of things. So the more exercises, the more applications we have, the better that learning is going to be at the end. Gamification, or the use of game theory, is also starting to revolutionize the e-learning. And for me, good e-learning incorporates gamification. So we have lots of different ways that we use gamification to try and do it. So we can encourage people to continue going along by letting them collect points, which might sound a little bit crazy, because why would that encourage you? But the more points you get, the better, and it just keeps people moving along. It could be that you set up a leaderboard within your company or within the whole of the people that use it. So you can just say who's doing the best, who's collected the most points in the quickest time, those kind of things. You can set it so that people get quests or missions, and the more of something they do, the more knowledge they can free up on the system, so they can delve deeper or they can get to the next level. You can set it, if you've not collected enough points, you can't actually get to the next point, to try and make that happen. You could have progress indicators, so just so that people know how far they've got. So you'll see this on things like LinkedIn with your profile, how much have you completed, that kind of thing. It all just keeps the engagement going, which is what good e-learning is all about. It can even go to things where you have to pick your character. So in this instance, you can either be Claire or you can be Peter. Anything that keeps that engagement going is what good e-learning is all about, to try and make that happen. You can collect resources to see how far you've got. So in this case, you've got to try and collect 6 badges to complete the training, to try and make it happen. And then we can also do things like social interaction. So you can get it so that you can invite your friends to join in, they can play a game together, you can have a forum where you talk together, so that social interaction gets better. Gamification is a very powerful way for us to keep that good e-learning, that engagement moving forward. One of the things we hear constantly about e-learning is that it doesn't have the social interaction, if you like, of a classroom. And there's no reason why that should happen in a good e-learning environment. We can set it up so that you can have forums where you can talk to one another. We can have it so that the e-learning is part of your wider learning experience. So it's not a replacement of the classroom, but it's a supplementary part of the learning experience. It could be that everyone does the e-learning and then comes to a classroom for a discussion how to do it. So we move to more of that blended learning experience. But if we have these things in place, suddenly we're getting rid of that bad paradigm where it's not about people. I think e-learning is all about using it in a creative way to help the learner as we go through. So good e-learning really has the power to almost train in any subject, given enough time to develop it, to hit the learning styles, to use all that interactivity, and to look at things slightly different. Over the last 10 years, most companies involved in this have kind of gone through a journey. They've kind of started at one element and they've developed their e-learning as we go. And here at 100% Effective, we're no different. We started way back in 2007 and we had some interesting e-learning modules in the business improvement world, where we started. And effectively it was those PowerPoint slides with a voiceover. In some instances, that voiceover was mine. The quality of the audio might not have been perfect. I would say the only difference ours had was it wasn't me reading the slides. It was me telling a story or expanding on the points on the slide. But effectively, it was that PowerPoint slide. Over the pace, we've taken our own e-learning further forward by developing it using our business improvement sort of methodologies. And now we've got it to a state where it's state-of-the-art e-learning with all that interactivity, all that engagement to try and make sure that it does that applying learning for the learner. We now have 4 libraries of courses, about 70 courses that people can purchase, be it in business improvement, obviously, change management, management development, personal development, and each one of those courses has been designed for the different learning styles. It's been designed with gamification, it's been designed with all that interactivity so that everybody engages at every single point. And we've obviously been showing you some of those examples as we've gone through so far. Our focus primarily has always been as educators. So when we started our journey, the reason we started doing e-learning was how can we use e-learning to pass on knowledge and get people to be able to apply it and be effective in their role. So we're educators that use technology to try and do that kind of stuff. That means we're constantly looking for that balance of how much interactivity, animation, video, gamification that we put in. Some companies might go over the top on that because they're more technology-led. The thing that turns them on is the technology. For us, the thing that turns us on is the learning. So for us, it's really important to get that balance right and not just put technology in for technology's sake. We could, of course, go and have virtual e-learning and have headsets that show everything in 3D, but the cost would be astronomical, so nobody would ever be able to afford it, and the actual learning experience wouldn't work. So good e-learning is all about how do we make sure that the person learning the skill can actually apply it and use it in the workplace or their own personal lives so they can get better and the business can better. And it's making sure that that balance is in place. If you get that right, e-learning can have a dramatic effect on individuals and on the business. When they've done all the various studies in this kind of thing, there's some very fascinating numbers start to come out. E-learning takes significantly less time to do than a classic classroom training. You don't have all the travel time. You can do it when you want. You take it to the level of the depth that you need. And you can do things quicker, faster, easier. You're not constrained by the slowest person in the classroom. You're constrained by yourself. So you've got control of it yourself. You do it when you want it, how you want it, to the level you want it. It's quite remarkable when you look at e-learning also because you get 5 times more material in an e-learning course than you will in a classroom course because we can put in 10 examples from different industries. We can give you different exercises to do. Where in the classroom, we're constrained by time. We're also constrained by the other people in the room. So the more exercises, the more examples, the more ways to apply it we can put in, the better. So e-learning, therefore, gives us that ability to try and do it. E-learning also helps companies. There's a study was done that showed that 25% of employees leaving a company were doing because they hadn't had the training opportunities or they were frustrated by their own personal development. Companies that embrace e-learning and e-learning libraries can give people training what they want, when they want it. And it's quick, it's easy, you don't have to wait for someone else to come along. You can just get involved with it straight away. E-learning is also one of these things that cuts cost, 50 to 70% cheaper to do an e-learning course than it is to go on a course in the classroom. You don't have travel and hotels and wait for 10 people to be involved. You retain more knowledge because of all that interactivity and ways to apply it. And you can do it when you want it to try and make it happen. So there's some distinct advantages in an e-learning world. Some of you might have heard of something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, this is something that's upon us now. This is where people are moving to more automation, robots taking over things, Amazon delivering things with drones, things being in the cloud, and technology is really overtaking everything. And it's happening not just in factories, it's offices, it's happening everywhere. And the more of it that happens is going to change the way the world is being done. And everybody is going to have to be able to train and change and do things quickly. So that means you're constantly going to have to be upskilling, looking at new careers, looking at new ways to do things. So the only way to do that is through e-learning, because you won't have the time, the cost, or the money to go on constant training courses to try and make that happen. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we set that up so that you can get that learning when you want it. I would go as far as to say that training providers that have not got e-learning in bite-sized ways will not be in business in 5 years. If they are, they'll be declining rapidly. So we need to make sure that that fourth industrial revolution is going to be embraced, and e-learning is a great way to do that. For me, e-learning is something that is going to take over. It's something that we're going to have to embrace. And if you're not already doing so, you need to start down that road. If we don't, it's going to affect our standardization of the way we do things. It's going to make us less productive. Our quality is going to be worse. We need to try and make sure we do it. E-learning, when it's done well, will save you money. It'll engage your people, it'll educate your people, and you'll obviously get fantastic results to try and do that. If we do it properly, then we'll get everyone doing it and learning constantly. If we don't, and we go back to the paradigms that we started right at the beginning, then the problem is people are going to go, I can't learn that way. So we need to make sure that we set up with good e-learning as opposed to the bad or the ugly e-learning that we talked about before. And with the onset of this fourth industrial revolution, it's absolutely vital, in my opinion, that we embrace e-learning and do it properly. So hopefully that's covered what I think the good and the bad and the ugly of e-learning is. I was just wondering if there's any questions.
Hi, John. We have had some questions in. So the first question we've had is, if e-learning doesn't replace classroom training, how is it going to reduce costs?
For me, it replaces, I've probably overstated, it replaces some of the classroom training. So for me, I would use it in a blended approach. So when we do classroom training now, what we would do is there's pre-learning that's done with the e-learning module. You then come into the classroom for a shorter period of time and do some debates and how do you apply it and more discussions. Then you go away, you do some more e-learning and so on. So the bit that reduces the cost is, instead of it being a 3-day course, it might be a 1-day course. So you've got less time to try and do it. That's how I would say it reduces that cost.
Okay, another question is, can interactivity ever be detrimental to learner outcomes?
Definitely. We know of one company where they've got so much animation in their e-learning that it takes, in my opinion, 3 times too long You sit there actually waiting for the animation to finish when you've already got what the concept is, you already know what the answer is, you've kind of worked it out, but you have to actually wait, and you tick, 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 wait for it to try and finish, and then you move on. For me, that's detrimental because it's a waste of time, and it's too much over the top. It's also a bit, in some instances, a bit silly because it just isn't required, and some companies are carried away by the technology, and it's a balancing act, as I said earlier on, I think.
We've also had this question, where does e-learning fit into the 70-20-10 model for training?
Yeah, so the 70-20-10 model is all about, learning, applying, and then doing it to try and make it happen. To me, it sits absolutely perfectly because it actually has all those elements in it. So the learning is obviously the theory that you've seen. The applying it and thinking about it is all about how you use it. So we would put questions in there to do it. And then you follow it up with, now do something in the real world. And you have to keep coming back and showing that you've done something in the real world. The other thing that's great about e-learning is it's always there. So if you're doing something in the real world and you forget about it, you can just go back on and spend 5 minutes, relearn it, and then go and apply it. So you've constantly got almost like a trainer on your shoulder, if you like, so that when you're doing it, you can actually get support all the way through. So all of our e-learning, for example, comes with lifetime support. So you've always got that access to the learning so that you can try and make sure that you can use it. So I think it fits perfectly with that 70-20-10.
Okay, and just one more question. Just using e-learning doesn't increase access to the training. So how would you address that?
In terms of having access to different training courses?
So earlier on, you mentioned that if people don't have access to training, they go and they find it themselves.
Sorry. Yeah, you need to be able to give people access to training. It's all about development. I was at a food industry conference on Friday, and every single company that stood up talked about a skills gap. Every single person that stood up talked about the need for more training for their people to try and do it. If you don't provide training, they're going to get really frustrated, and they're going to eventually go somewhere where they get that training, they get that education. So having a suite of e-learning courses available so that the person can pick and choose what they want when they want it for their own personal development just encourages learning on an ongoing basis, but also helps the business because they're going to get those skills brought into the business when they require them.
Okay. And we've just had another question pop in. Is the future of e-learning creation or curation?
Wow, right. That's a good question. I think it's probably both. I think that we need to create the right e-learning, so make sure that it's fulfilling what we require. But we also need to know what it is we require. And I think e-learning is just in its infancy, if I'm being honest. I think typically what companies do with e-learning just now is they buy a learning and management system, they put some money laundering, some health and safety and other compliance courses on there. The next thing they do is they start thinking about replacing classroom training with e-learning courses. And I think that's just the infancy. I think there are hundreds of different ways that we can use e-learning that we've not even thought about. How to get people to do standardized things, how to get people to build furniture, how to get people to do various things in a different way. So I think there's lots of examples of e-learning that we can talk about and help people to build bespoke e-learning, if you like, rather than just the way that we currently do it.
Okay. That's all the questions that we've got. Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent. That's excellent. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending and listening to me go on for the last half an hour. At the end of this, we're going to click on and you can book a training or a consultation with us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to let you come and talk about your e-learning needs. So if you have, please come and talk to us. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you very much indeed for listening to me over the last half an hour.